Hello, Culminators. This is, we've already been talking, Nan Hayworth and I. We have so much to cover. There's so much that we have in common and so many things that we're both interested in. I have recently gotten feedback that it wouldn't be terrible if I did a little bit more introduction, a little bit more of the introduction stuff. So I'm going to do a little bit more than I usually do. Dr. Nan Hayworth, appointed to serve as a member of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. She is a physician, an ophthalmologist. Mm-hmm. She is a former member of the House of Representatives, serving in the 19th District of New York. She is very outspoken on topics that you will find that if you follow me in any social media, that I'm outspoken about as well. The difference is she knows what she's talking about. So we're going to talk about that. But actually, before we were officially starting, we were talking about Princeton. And really, if you're going to talk about, the destruction or decline and fall of great institutions and of freedom of speech, Princeton is as good of a place as any. We both attended Princeton. Mm-hmm. Approximately at the same time. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't think to look at us that in fact
I'm the older one.
Well, that I would never say that in a million years, but then everyone has to know that I'm not nearly as old as I look. I had Robert George on the podcast last year, and he was so pleased and so justifiably at the time proud with how Princeton had dealt with the Joshua Katz situation. And little did he know that they were slipping the shiv in. It was what an absolute travesty. And Princeton has become known as, in surveys, as the college in the United States, the major universities, where people feel least comfortable speaking up in opposition to, the prevalent orthodoxy. And do you have any idea from your observations how that happened? How did Princeton go so far so fast?
Yeah, thought about it for a long time, Ron. And I as it happens, within my resume is the privilege to have served on the Department of Politics Advisory Council in 2015 and 2016. As far as I know, they haven't officially terminated me, but
that's interesting that you were you majored in biology at Princeton.
Biology, correct. But the Department of Politics in 2015 reestablished its advisory council. And interestingly enough, I was not the only Republican, not that we were overtly announcing our party affiliation, but I was the only, which fascinates me because Princeton has produced a number of electeds, but I was the only one who had served in elected office. And I think the coda to my experience with them came when just before the 2016 election, when we were all asked, the friendly question went out, well, for whom are you voting for president? I said, well, Donald Trump. Yeah.
Silence.
Oh dear. Silence. Well, yes, yeah. So,
well, I mean, in the 80s, people don't realize that what we see happening, not people don't realize, but a lot of people don't realize that, especially younger people, that a lot of what we see happening with political correctness on campus was presaged in our time.
Yes.
It was right after freshman week for me, right when you were getting to know your cadaver.
Yeah.
Jerry Falwell, the Reverend Jerry Falwell, came to speak at Princeton in Alexander Hall, the old Alexander Hall, not before they gutted it and turned it into
the constipated orangutan of architecture, as one Princetonian wag described it.
Well, I at the time I was conservative, but I was still feeling my way out. I said, let me listen to this controversial guy here. This is one of the great things about coming to Princeton. world famous people.
You would hope.
And I get in there and the room is filled with protesters. And they're not only protesting, so I couldn't get a seat, but they're not only protesting, when he speaks, they stand up to block him and turn their backs to him to indicate that they're not going to listen.
Right.
Why don't you not listen back in your dorm room? Right. So I get it. It's a form of performative protest, sort of like that. Speaking of now, a perfect segue, the medical school at Michigan.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What the heck is?
No, it's unprofessional and unbecoming behavior. And I do think, and I've talked about it, Ron, I think we have witnessed the apotheosis of the so-called goo-goos, the good government types. And I think what our
the Woody Woos.
Well, precisely. But Princeton and, of course, all of our comparable institutions, but Princeton has obviously occupied a pinnacle of sorts. And I was, as we discussed, I felt enormously blessed every day that I was on that campus.
You mentioned that you came out of the Midwest, not from a
public
hoity-toity
high school. No,
yeah,
public high school. Yep.
Me parents. Too. I'll tell you, I went to public high. First, my parents had never even went to college.
Yeah.
And I went to a public high school, and somehow and when my parents dropped me off, my father was crying. He couldn't believe the world to which they had brought me.
Right.
And somehow they would find the $11,000.
Right.
And as you said before, you felt so blessed. What an incredible country. My mother came to this country as a young teenager, and my father was an orphan growing up on the Lower East Side, raised by his grandmother, an immigrant. And here I am. And to some extent, as you said before, it was a great equalizer. Although I think it's true, we got the same degrees as the Rockefellers and Montgomerys and the likes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Although I don't necessarily think, it took me a very, very long time to understand that the network, in other words, a place like Princeton reinforces existing networks.
Yes. And
then you sort of become a known person, but you're not going to be admitted to networks that you otherwise wouldn't. I mean, you could through the club system if you really, really wanted to. So where did you eat?
Oh, I was in Cloister.
In Cloister, so that was a cool, funky.
I was in Cloister with Elena Kagan and Elliot Spitzer.
Oh gosh, what an interesting crowd.
Yeah. Elena was delightful. She was obviously highly intelligent. She was the editor of the Daily Princetonian. So I had a very dear friend who was in the Daily Princetonian Smart Set. So I got to rub elbows with them just a little bit.
Yeah.
But, like you, Ron, I'm the daughter of an immigrant. My parents were both absolutely brilliant and wonderful people. Both grew up poor. My dad in the United States, both World War II veterans. My mother was 4 years in the British Army.
Wow.
Yeah, she was, if you've ever seen Darkest Hour, she was one of those teletype operators. So she was in London for the Blitz.
Wow.
Right through the end of the war.
I say cool now because it's cool to have done it.
Well,
doing it might have felt so cool.
She was beautiful and brave and vivacious, and she had a marvelous K through 12 education on scholarship, but couldn't afford to go to college. So that's where it ended for her. So she became a secretary. Funnily enough, so did my dad. He became a clerk.
Clerk.
Because, yeah. And then they both ended up, my dad ended up becoming a CPA, getting his, MBA and everything. And my mother was smarter than her bosses. But, here was I, thanks to them, here was I at the most prestigious university in the world, arguably. And I felt so very fortunate. But in retrospect, what I appreciate, my then fiance, later husband, and I were the only ones in our set to vote for Ronald Reagan in 1980, a vote of which I remain proud today.
Well,
so I was always conservative. I'm a libertarian, but libertarian, conservative, fiscal conservative, always a Republican. Always cherish the Constitution. I look at my passports, the United States of America, and get choked up. So I'm one of those. Never changed and never regretted it. The only votes I've ever regretted, Ron, are the ones I made for some local Democrats who seemed nice enough, but were absolute jerks. So those are the only votes I regret. Don't regret my Republican votes, but in any case, Princeton churns out all of these graduates who have been imbued with a sense that they are special, right? The message you get from the moment you arrive on that campus and they teach you the alma mater, right, is that you probably had Freddie Fox too, right? Do it, right?
We were the first class that didn't have Freddie Fox. And you have to, the whole class of 85 saga, we by the time we graduated considered I couldn't care less about that, but we were we were considered the hosed class, and we were the class whose 35th reunion was canceled by COVID.
Yeah, well, it was my 40th. That was, my 40th was last year, but so far has Princeton descended in my esteem that I didn't give a buck for my 40th. And I was on the National Annual Giving Committee. I led the proletarian majority of annual giving for my 25th. That's how much I loved and respected and was grateful for everything that had come to me through Princeton, because
that's how little annual giving matters to them. For all the propaganda, everyone should give something. Ron, come on, just give.
Yeah.
No, what matters is the hot shots.
Oh, absolutely.
These are the people. And by the way, who becomes a president of a university now? Fundraisers. Fundraisers. I'm not talking about guys like Bill Bowen.
No, absolutely. Don't get between a big donor and a university official, because you will be run over. That is so true. And I valued more the $100 that a teacher would send us than the 10,000 that would come from a venture capitalist. But absolutely. Princeton runs on the money. That's why I'm like, gee, I'll bet if you surveyed the faculty, they probably wouldn't have a terribly high opinion of Carl Icahn, class of 70, I think it was. No, class of 58, I think maybe he was, of Carl Icahn. And yet there's an Icahn Science Building. It's like, so what are we talking? I would certainly have an Icahn Science Building, but, makes the point. These people, this, and I'll tell you one thought that's crystallized in my head a day or two ago, but Princeton churns out these graduates and tells them, go thou with the gifts that you have, because you're special, and now you've been through a very, very special place. Go thou and change the world through policy, right? That's what they say. It's all about policy. And that inherently is based in government and is based in coercion. The defining property of government is that it can kill you
if you don't listen.
Right? That's the policing power of government. What's the difference between the government and your local grocery store? Well, if your local grocery store doesn't agree with you, they can't, they can't send the sheriff to your door necessarily. But if the sheriff comes to your door because the government wants you, the sheriff has a gun. It's like, right? So that's the defining property. They don't think of it that way. Government for Princeton alumni is meant to have it. Students is meant to have the penumbra of virtue, right? All good things come from government or through government.
And it's a matter of just doing the math.
Yep.
It's what they call technocracy, right?
Yep.
Let's just figure out, let's do the Venn diagram.
Absolutely.
And we're going to figure out how to serve the nation. They were still saying Princeton, the nation's service in those days. And you're entitled to make those decisions because you are the elite. You are the best.
Of course,
You're not-
absolutely right. And in this complex world, and that basically the complexity of life, so-called black box challenge, if you will, arose right around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. And that's where swaths of life began to be, beyond the spiritual or the existential issues. That's where swaths of life began to be less comprehensible to the average person. So, now, of course, in this very, as you say, technologically advanced era, you need guides. We need well-meaning, benign, benevolent, authoritarian experts who are going to tell you what to do and how to live your life. COVID brought that.
Right. And it doesn't matter whether you know who those experts are. If Twitter tells you that they have an expert, then the fact that it's a huge public company or a hugely valuable public company is all you need to know. You'll defer to that.
Right.
So now you've made the segue, the important one. And of course, we already mentioned the walkout of these first-year students, punks. They walked out from a speaker who was known to be pro-life, not because she was or he was going to speak about abortion, but this was her personal view, and she's therefore a non-person.
Right.
These are first-year medical students.
Yep.
Okay. What happened? What happened to the medical profession?
Oh, well, yeah, the medical profession, all the professions really, Ron. I mean, look at law. But it is frightening how the medical profession has been co-opted by the big government, left-leaning authoritarians. And I think it's strongly because government has, over the course of the past 100 years, and of course I was listening to you with Chris Rufo, the march of Marxism through our institutions started for serious in the Franklin Roosevelt administration. And, I think he was a disaster as president, although, war is a statist paradise. So, he managed to get us through the war, but all of these, good government types can be co-opted by Marxists. And of course they were. So as soon as healthcare became a province of the federal government, then it was destined to become ever more so. That's why the framers were so brilliant in severely delimiting the remit of the federal government. It wasn't ever meant to manage any aspect of our day-to-day lives, right? And that includes healthcare. But healthcare too has become, it's the black box. Maybe it's the ultimate black box in a lot of ways, right? And and I being a physician, and having been a patient and having been the daughter of of patients, I certainly appreciate how incredibly difficult it is to get through, to optimize the use of our healthcare system, unless you have, the right guides and the right insurance and the right, connections and things like that. But it is, because of that, government, that the authoritarian types have completely taken over the healthcare profession, and because government has been co-opted by the so-called woke, well, here they are. And, I belong to an organization called Do No Harm, which was started by Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, who's a courageous former professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, who is giving voice to those of us who can't speak, because you know what it's like, Ron, if you are in these institutional settings or even in the healthcare industry.
If I knew what it were like, I wouldn't be on my 14th job.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, look, big healthcare, is American medicine now. Big insurers, big healthcare systems, big hospitals, big pharma, big providers, because of course that's the inevitable result of government managing things is that there's consolidation, there's cartelization,
and corporate capture, and the
there's
and
corporate capture.
revolving door regulation. I mean,
Exactly.
how to do that? See, magic. People always ask me how do they stay on?
Yeah,
And I'm always saying, look, they stay on remarkably well.
they do. Yes.
Especially if you don't have all that much hair to,
Well, Scott's Jewish. I raised 2 nice Jewish kids, so there you go.
Oh, okay. Well, I raised a few of them myself. So here's the thing, though. I understand institutionally, like I expect the AMA, which I suppose is like the ABA, they're just, they've completely been captured by, the Democratic Party. But everyone who's gone to physicians themselves in their practices.
Yeah.
We grew up with this idea of doctors as being almost scientists.
Yeah.
And in some cases they are scientists.
Right.
And being, these empiricists. And, I recently had my checkup, and my doctor happens to be one of my oldest friends. And he has the kind of practice now where he doesn't have to, he does things on his pace the way he likes it. And we schmoozed for 45 minutes before he even got out the stethoscope. Okay?
Is he in a concierge practice?
Basically, that's what it is now. Yeah, that's basically what it is now.
Yeah.
And meaning that I'm lucky if I get anything back on the insurance, but he's fantastic.
Yeah.
He's sitting there, and we're both sitting there the whole time with masks on. This is a guy, he's a grad, I don't want to even, and no identifying information, but a graduate of a medical school that you would know very well. Oh no, he's a professor, he's a clinical professor there, but he graduated from another New York law school. The point is, why? There's no one else in there, okay? So he doesn't have partners to satisfy.
Now, were you wearing an N95 mask?
No, I wasn't aware. He was wearing an N95, but I wasn't. And if he is, why am I? That's not going to be this podcast. That's not going to be this podcast. But
no, I get it. But yeah.
Where and I remember once I went to a dermatologist. He said, "Oh yeah, you definitely want to get the the vaccination. There's really no reason why you wouldn't." I said, "Well, I had it. I had COVID. Yeah. Right? I mean, that would be the reason why I wouldn't.
Right.
No, everyone. And
I know
what. So so in the legal profession, it's different because institutionally, the big firms have become captured, and they do things like what Kirkland and Ellis did to, Paul Coleman and his colleague, and that's disgusting. But guess what? There are lots of places like, well, there's not lots of places like the Dillon Law Group where I practice, but there are lots of alternatives for lawyers. Moreover, we have to win. And until the judiciary becomes woke, which we may be on our way to, but it might not be during my lifetime, we have to win. And therefore, we have to actually deal with the law and the arguments as they more or less are. But doctors,
yes, right.
All they're dealing with is death and life.
Oh, yes.
And somehow that should be a greater, crucible of truth. But instead,
no, you know what, Ron, I have, and I've had a lot of exposure in various ways, not only through practice, but also through obviously observing how policy is made. And being on a local hospital system board, and my husband's an executive who's an OBGYN, and he runs an enormous medical practice. Medicine, one of the ways in which medicine has become more challenging, far more challenging for those practicing, is that there's a phenomenon of social determinants of health, which is a valid consideration. There are certainly social determinants of health. There's no question about it. But when you ask physicians, those and hospitals, those who are meant to provide basically care that has to fundamentally be based in human biology. I mean, that's what we're dealing with, life or death, human biology, right? Ultimately, you're trying to manipulate human biology so that someone who is ill recovers, so that someone who is healthy can remain so. We have drawn the circle of responsibility too far out in healthcare, and it has become a distraction, and thus it is. I would submit to you about applying critical theory to the practice of medicine, while it is appropriate to be aware.
And medical education.
Yes, well, exactly. And it's very appropriate to be aware of American history, of sociology, of community phenomena, of the circumstances in a given person's life that can affect both their health and the way in which they can pursue the measures that we may ask them to pursue with us so that they can maintain health or get better. But when we try to do more than that, when we start, which is what's happening now, of course, at major institutions, because now you've got the, academic, the academy and institutional healthcare conspiring, if you will. If you walk in the door and the first thing they look at is, well, it's white female. Okay, let me just qualify that person's demographics. It's black male. Oh well, we have, I think we're getting into very dangerous territory. And from the pure standpoint of practicing healthcare, we're getting away from we're taking precious resources away from attention to the problem at hand, which is this person has glaucoma, this person is about to have a heart attack, or whatever it may be, and it's dangerous and wrong.
It certainly is. I mean, it's reached the point where as I was sort of alluding to in the beginning, talking about Princeton, there's been such a decline in institutions, many of them centuries old,
of course,
some of them millennia old, including the medical profession,
right? That
were always, and the judiciary,
yes,
that were traditionally redoubts of at least some. Far more than a modicum. They were among the most trusted institutions in the world.
We hope they were meritocratic, right, Ron? And unfortunately, I think what's happened, what I alluded earlier to, a thought that had crystallized, it's really true. The education government complex, which is what I call most of academia these days, the education government complex, which extends from pre-K right through graduate education in the United States, is basically at this point pretty much a wholly owned subsidiary, not just of the government in so many ways, but of the Democrat Party. They are the extortion division of the Democrat Party. I mean, any school with public support, how do they manage themselves? Well, they manage themselves to please the government, and again,
and to maximize profit. I mean, and the idea that you have these consolidations. I mean, it's funny because something occurred to me that had never occurred to me before when you mentioned the government education.
The education government complex.
Yep. I don't know. I don't think you meant this, but it occurred to me. In the last 10 or 15 years, there have been all these consolidations of hospital systems.
Yes.
And there used to be that, well, if you want to go to Mount Sinai,
right,
you go to the Upper East Side and, you drop off your wife, and then you look for parking for 3 hours and she comes out, but it's worth it because she's gone to
when you come back,
Sinai.
She's had the baby.
They did very good work there.
Yeah. I was arrested there, so I know.
So now there's a Mount Sinai everywhere. It's like a McDonald's.
Yeah.
Because they bought all these and I remember when this happened in the legal profession 20, 30 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Firms that had reputations as being very good and then wanted to acquire local offices so they would have a presence here and a presence there,
Yeah.
frequently would lower their standards considerably and dilute their brands.
Yeah.
But that's almost really a side point. But I note now that so many of these hospital systems are affiliated with some
Yeah.
great university now.
Yeah.
And the hospital systems themselves, as you say, are virtually government entities.
Yeah, basically. I mean,
And then
yeah,
the relationship between them and the insurers who
absolutely.
really make the care decisions.
Yeah.
It's absolutely so as a libertarian,
Yeah. It's a circular relationship between, and it's all perpetually self-enriching, right? Among the institutions and government that makes the laws and pries the funds out of the taxpayers' pockets.
so now let me ask you, as a libertarian, I might expect you to tell me, well, that's how the market works. We love that. This is just how it
But
is.
that's not it, but it's not the market.
I know.
It's,
I couldn't have lobbed you slower. I couldn't have been it would have to be Canesbury softball to be a slower, but
and I have no athletic ability for that. Yeah, I duck when something's thrown at me, but I didn't duck that one. Yeah, so you say, yeah, it's not the market, right? It is a manipulated situation that is primarily the result of government intervention with the coercive, lethal force of government.
So is there any way
co-opted by people who are clever, and human beings will always endeavor to maximize their own advantage.
Right. So so now, as someone who has been a legislator, been a physician,
Yep.
and now you're involved in the medical business.
Well, I'm not.
Well, you're married to it, right? Your husband.
I'm married to it.
Yes.
I'm married.
How do you see, from a policy point of view, right? Because we're still,
Right.
if you want to tell me, Rhonda, the answer is not policy anymore, then I want to know what it is.
Well,
Is it torches at night in the street? I don't think so.
no,
So-
I know. Yeah.
So from a policy point of view, how do you, I'm making you president. I'm giving you a veto-proof majority
Wow.
of actual Republicans, not what we have seen from time to time.
Right.
What's the policy that you have sponsored on the floor of the House to fix this, to begin to fix it?
Yeah, I would obviously the best answer is ever more progressively, so to speak. I'm so furious that they took that word from us, but progressively to walk us toward private contracting in healthcare, to independent marketplaces, certainly independent of the federal government. But there's no question, Ron, that would require a gradual transition. We've never had, and I'm not going to blame any of our Republican presidents, but we've never had, and even President Reagan didn't do this. I would love to have a national chalk talk in which our president, say, took an hour of prime time on, the cable and broadcast networks and said, look, in layman's terms, but here's our problem. We've got an awful lot that we're going to owe our creditors. And some of that's us, but a lot of it's, other nations like China, for example. If we don't do something, if we don't do something about getting these costs under control, and we can do it. And we understand that, you're all depending on the government. Medicare, our seniors are depending on the government to get their health care. The folks who rely on Medicaid, we get it. But what we're going to do is walk everybody down. We're going to walk us. We're going to make a bridge, or if you're in a staircase, whatever it is, over the next 10 years, let's say. We've got a long.
And this seems to be the biggest legislative challenge under our system.
Yeah.
Where you've got people who are reelected every 2 years in the House, that it's almost seems almost impossible to do any kind of long-term
Right,
planning, because
right.
it's sort of like a cartel that has, I learned this from Ken Oye. I don't know if you remember him from the Princeton Politics Department. Very popular
No,
lecturer. He taught
yeah.
taught us about game theory, but every cartel is just waiting for the first cheating to begin, because the more efficient the cartel, the better the payoff for the first cheater. And that's also true with, with an election cycle every 2 years, is that the more long-term your policy,
Mhm.
the easier it is for someone to say, oh, this is a disaster. And you're saying to everyone, no, this is going to be a disaster. It's going to be really hard. But after the first 4 or 5 years, it's going to really be great. So then there's this really high incentive to say, you see how this is terrible. I'll pull us out of this. It was fine before. All right. Is it possible? Can we do it? Also, we have this complication of the price. The prices are the pricing of everything in the health.
It's so distorted. It's completely distorted. I mean, there are things that we can do. Like if we simply allowed private contracting in Medicare, so that someone which is not allowed now by Medicare, you have to charge every Medicare patient the same fee. And by the way, you can't give them a break on the copay, because
oh yeah, you can go to prison for that.
Yeah, no, you can't. But there are patients who would love to pay more to have, let's say, a concierge type of situation. They can't do that if they have Medicare. Right. And Medicare providers can't do that. Even something as simple as that would be empowering. The best ideas that you'll find are from John Goodman at the Goodman Institute. And I sit on John's board, and he's got lots of ideas that would occupy a very comfortable transition, a ground that empowers patients in markets that are more robust, that allow them to use their market power to make the health care they get through their insurance, whether it's heavily government influence, which most of it is or not, better. So I commend the Goodman Institute to everyone, and John Goodman's very easy to read, so he definitely makes great cases for that. But here's what concerns me, Ron. And when I was in Congress, what the biggest lesson I took away from it, there were many lessons, as you might imagine, but the biggest one is, guess what? We can shake our fists at those idiots in Washington all we want. Most of those idiots are doing what their constituents want or expect them to do. So it's really, I mean, and by the way,
this is the fundamental question
exactly. I mean, my Republican colleagues, for the most part, were really solid people, and many of them had been in small business. They really did understand market economics far better than the Democrats. And that includes, the Democrats have a sort of bimodal distribution. They've got like the doctorate holders, the academic types, who live in their ivory tower. And I don't know why we thought, well, green energy everywhere just makes sense. Let's do it now, and then they have, folks who, may think that Guam is floating on the ocean like a meringue. But
there are really some remarkably stupid people.
There are, and you know what?
Caucus in both
I don't blame those folks who are uneducated. I do blame all the public sector bureaucracies, especially since the so-called Great Society programs that consigned, especially urban communities, to disorder, to lack of education, to lack of opportunity, and if Democrats really wanted to change the prospects for folks, they would start with the teachers' unions. They would start with the public education bureaucracy, and they can't go there because the teachers' unions are their #1 extortion division. But all the rest of it is just BS. So, and it goes to my point about, how do we change government? We can't change the government unless we change our electorate. Unless we have a culturally, and when I say culturally, I mean historically, civics, apprehending, founding values, apprehending basic economics, not modern monetary theory, but real economics like Henry Hazlitt, Austrian school economics. If we have an electorate that can understand those things and understand the beauty and brilliance, the liberating humaneness of our Constitution, even Elena Kagan seems not to understand that, sadly. And Sonia Sotomayor, another Princetonian. But you understand, if we had an electorate that apprehended those things, and who does among all of our American citizens, Ron, I would submit to you, are naturalized Americans. Naturalized Americans who entered this country legally, know the most about our Constitution, value it the most because they know what the alternatives are. And Americans have been, they failed to understand how we became prosperous, how we became strong.
But my mom is one of those people.
Yes.
And she's now living in Florida with all the other Yentas, okay? And she watches The View. And her brain and whatever natural intelligence she has, so she watches this all day long. And
how could you watch The View, Ron?
She is, believe me, it's not just my mom, it's all the moms. And this is, yeah, right. So let me just
that show will make you stupid.
No, it will absolutely make you stupid. And it absolutely make you stupid. But this is our problem with our electorate.
Yes.
And look, you and I have been on this sort of love fest of the old Princeton experience. Old for us, neither one of us would have been at Princeton a generation earlier, but nonetheless, there was this real sense of excellence and of not of elitism. Of course, there was also elitism, but of an elite experience.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, the vast majority of people aren't eligible for that. They couldn't benefit from that if you gave them the opportunity.
Right.
And it's a fundamental question on democracy because we should have been getting smarter. The demos should have been getting smarter. It's getting dumber.
Oh yeah, and it's because our teacher corps, and frankly, I would have to say that the unfortunately the least sensible people in this country at the moment are the products of the Ivy Leagues. So what I'm talking about in terms of understanding civics, the values of our founding, economics, all those things, they're not esoteric, and you don't need a university, and God knows you're better off without a university.
No, in fact, I always said that you've heard me say this a million times because you've just revealed that you actually listen to this stuff.
Yeah.
Donald Trump reflected common sense.
Exactly.
Notwithstanding the fact that his father was wealthy, his father was blue collar wealthy, owning red brick apartment buildings in Brooklyn is not, from the manor born, to use your earlier statement.
Yeah, right,
it's working your way up. And Donald Trump, to a large extent, a lot of his extravagant way of life is exactly what you'd expect of a nouveau riche. But the point is, which if anything, Princeton teaches you how not to behave. If there's one thing that Princeton teaches you, it's how not to ever, if you ever do come into money, never look like that.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
His point of view on policies was, what would a regular person, what would a guy from Queens think?
Absolutely.
And that's what he was, and that's what I am.
Exactly. No, Ron. President Trump was saying what every sensible person was thinking.
And therefore they had to turn him into a monster. They could not oppose him with ideas. They opposed him by calling him a racist. You didn't grow up in the New York area, but you lived in the New York area for most of your life.
Yes.
You never heard him referred to as it was unheard. It was, he wouldn't have been, could he have been so in public? It would have been involved in public life, getting a TV show, unheard of, impossible. He was worse than Hitler every single day. Yeah. But we're on well-trod ground. Nan, fantastic talking to you. We had much more fun than really humans should be allowed, but we are Princetonians and we are entitled to specialness.
Hmm.
I just heard Amy Wax, Professor Amy Wax,
Yes.
talking about how, as you were, the products of the Ivy League live the most bourgeois, upper middle class
Oh,
and
that's
higher
good.
lifestyles. But God forbid someone insists that that's a model, that marriage and traditional families and all those old-fashioned things are models for, for success in life. And it's a
But
cultural disaster.
Ron, we have, I think often, I think it was John Adams, I'm going to paraphrase Adams, but who said that that a nation designed as ours was only survives if the citizens have within themselves the Constitution. And when I say that, I mean, yes, our Constitution, but the moral constitution, that integrity. And I loved your conversation with Chris Rufo, but when you talked about how children have to have a place to land, they have to have a normative experience that is provided, yes, with compassion and love, and to the extent that we can have tolerance for different points of view, as long as they're not poisonously wrong. Like, let's say Drag Queen Story Hour, I think is just poisonously wrong. I wouldn't have regular Beauty Queen Story Hour either. I think that sexualizes kids too. But, right, all of those things are possible. But the left, there was, and I don't remember now who wrote it, but, when we talk about queer, and again, if you're an adult, you have a right to live your life as queerly as you like. But they are deliberately queering the experience of children because they want to disrupt this society. Now, we have many participants in this. And again, our teacher corps has been occupied for decades. Unfortunately, I was blessed to have amazing teachers, marvelous teachers when I was in Munster, Indiana public schools. But the teacher corps, the quality has been significantly diminished. And now I would say it's like actively being corrupted, and wittingly or unwittingly, these people are poisoning kids. They're destroying the moral fiber, the backbone, everything that kids should have and deserve in their background. And if you don't have that, then the adult will never form.
And adults need to take their responsibility. Parents need to remember it's their job to raise their kids, not the school systems.
Right.
Man, we're going to have to do this again. Thank you so much.
Privilege. Thank you, Ron.